Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and transgender people of the internet. My name is Mango Thunderslice, and you know what we're talking about when I'm wearing a Dropkick Murphy shirt. We're talking about the Irish civilization from which a lot of our historical structures have sprung, and the fall of Atlantis, which preceded it. So, yeah, distilling, 2,000-year-old secrets into as short a video as I can. That's what I'm doing here on this channel. Welcome to the internet. Please follow me. I think this lady might be I don't know if spirit animals could be people. That might be it for me. All right. So basically, I got the ripple up here because I feel like it kind of captures what I'm trying, with the undercurrent of what I'm trying to communicate today. And that's that, especially in the theme of the videos that I've been doing, talking about the electric universe and adopting the position that was very, very commonly held by all the smartest minds in the world before Einstein, that space is not a vacuum, that actually the entire universe is filled with the quintessence, the fifth classical element of ether, which is kind of like the sea. It's often represented poetically as an ocean or a sea, right? Throughout mythology, the sea, the ocean is actually referring to space, going with this narrative of the solar system, and from Velikovsky, that we haven't had such a peaceful history in our solar system, but there's actually been a lot of tumult and cataclysm. And so that pretty much is my introduction. I'll just jump right into it. Okay, so these are pictures of Atlantis, right? So, that's just kind of how they represent it. I'm basically watching these videos about the Irish people and the mythology, and the crazy thing about Irish civilization as opposed to a lot of other civilizations on this planet is that there's really no delineation between the magical, mystical, giants and spells and all kinds of really mystical, magical things. And there's no delineation between that and just the historical lineage of Celtic kings. Like they don't make any distinction, whereas we kind of, with Greek mythology, even though they were always talking about the gods, right? The Greeks, you could still kind of isolate Greek history from Greek mythology, at least in the academic setting. That's usually how they teach it. Whereas in Ireland, they're really like fused together. And the thesis of the electric universe, what's very obvious to me and a lot of other people, is that all around the world, the planets are the gods, right? And all the cultures around the world, without fail, assign the same planetary assignations to the same days of a week, right? So, moon for Monday, right? So like Deus for Tuesday, right? But those all correspond to the same planets for all civilizations around the world. So that indicates that we've had a common civilization we come from. And so, starting, again with the electric universe theme, the aurora borealis. Okay, I feel like this is just the visual that really connects things. That the electric universe, they suggest a lot of things, and it's kind of hard to comprehend if you don't understand what we already have on this planet and the correlates of the story. And just imagine, this, but on a major scale, with the planets in a different configuration. What the aurora borealis is a result of energy coursing into Earth's system, right? This is literally plasma flowing through the atmosphere as it comes in from space, energy from the sun, right? And it's kind of like Earth is a plasma globe, right? You've probably seen one of these. Nikola Tesla invented it. It's this ball, and there's all these little plasma beams, and they're moving around. And if you put your hand on it, right, it like gets attracted to your hand. So this is kind of you could look at this as the sun as a plasma orb. You could look at each of the planets as a plasma orb, and each one of them have their own magnetic field and magnetic charge. So they're all going to have these streams flowing in between each other, just like the hand and the globe right here, right? So, and where those lines connect, they connect to certain focal points on the Earth, right? And that is what they call the Earth grid. Okay, this is something that's treated very a mystical thing to a lot of people in the so-called skeptic community, right? But this is really the easiest way to think about it, is that the Earth is a sphere magnet. Einsteinian relativity is incomplete in that it leaves out the influence of electricity and magnetism on the operations of heavenly bodies in space, right? So the Earth grid is basically these points on the Earth where this energy comes in, and they're all over the place. And what's interesting is when we look at the locations of the major monuments of the world, right? The Giza Great Pyramid, Baalbek in Lebanon, all these different megaliths and these huge monuments, these huge stone monuments from China to South America, literally all over the world, and a lot of them are on this grid. They kind of make up this grid. And, one thing that you'll notice looking at this grid, if you look a little closer, is basically that around the top and around the bottom, but for the sake of this discussion, around the top, there's kind of a ring. There's the North Pole point, and then there's also the ring. There's kind of a crown to the planet, okay? And this is where we see the aurora borealis, is within this sphere generally. During times of electromagnetic stress, we'll see aurora borealis, further down, reaching towards this kind of second belt right here. But generally, you're going to see this kind of stuff right up here, on the top of the world, so to speak. And in ancient times, they had a name for the place up there. It was called Hyperborea, right? The aurora borealis. The borealis is basically like, the Arctic Circle. Okay, it's the top of the world. In Greek mythology, the Hyperboreans were a mythical race of giants who lived beyond the north wind, right? The Greeks thought that Boreas, the god of the north wind, lived in Thrace, therefore Hyperborea, blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, it's supposed to be in the Arctic Circle, generally at the top of the world. Okay, and this kind of leads me to the next aspect, because the aurora borealis, you can see the energy flowing into the planet, right? It's just like a plasma globe, but there's actually what you don't quite see just from the lights is that there's actually material also, okay? And so this is a video I did a long time ago, one of our first episodes, where I just it's a tutorial on how to make colloidal silver. And colloidal silver basically is, you set up, this is how to make it, right? And these are two electrodes. So one's positively charged, and the other is negatively charged. So there's electrons flowing between the two silver electrodes, and you can see this wispy kind of smoke in the water. And that's as the electrons flow in the water from one electrode to the other, it carries with it a positive silver ion. So the electron moves with a silver ion, and it creates these silver ions in the water, and that's how you make colloidal silver, right? And as it goes on, it'll look more like this, and basically it's creating tiny particles of silver. And in space, generally, what's being created is not silver but water. Okay. But in general, my point is that there's not just energy, but there's actually material flowing from from the different heavenly bodies. And hypothetically, if they were closer together, there would be a lot more charge moving between them, a lot more current would be able to flow, and more material would be transmitted. Whereas now, pretty much, we get these pretty lights and not necessarily a huge transfer of material. But that may not have been the case back in the day. Okay. So like, Jacob in the Bible supposedly laid his head and, dreamed that he saw a ladder reaching into heaven. And, basically this is just some artistic representation of the Stone of Honor light at Tara Hill in Ireland. So I've mentioned Tara as kind of the seat of the alternative church that stood in contravention to the Church of Rome for hundreds of years until the Second Crown of London basically wiped it out. But this is I thought that this artistic representation just kind of really captured something cool, because it's not just the idea that there was this ladder to heaven, a stairway to heaven, that just like that, it's a stairway, that there was actually a way to at very least communicate and possibly even transfer material and nullify gravity. There may have been an elevator, so to speak, that connected the planets at certain times. That's generally what the poetic discourse seems to indicate. And of course, here's Thunderbolt's project, Discourses on Alien Sky. They talk about the world mountain, right? That there was this planetary alignment, and so there was plasma flowing, and just like the aurora borealis, right? Just like the colloidal silver, when there's electrical current flowing, right? It can create this colorful sensation as the energy electrons move throughout different gases and strata of the atmosphere. And here, they had like the Twin Peak World Mountain, that there was, the horns was, the crescent illuminated Venus, or Saturn rather, behind Mars. And so basically, this was fixed at the top of the world, at the North Pole, right? So all of this energy was coming down to the North Pole, okay? It was coming down to Hyperborea, right? The top of the world. All right, so that's that. And that was called the Bowl of Heaven, okay? There's many, many names for this, this mountain, right? And this energy. But one of which was the Bowl of Heaven, and in Sumerian that's known as Enlil. And on the internet, you'll find a lot of wild stuff talking about Enlil and Enki and all these different names in the Sumerian mythology and all the different mythologies. And they're like assigning these all to alien deities coming down in these spaceships and stuff. But, again, Occam's razor, what's the simplest explanation? Is it easier to, imagine that there's this advanced race of aliens who's colonized the entire universe, blah, blah, blah? Or that, just like our ancestors were trying to tell us, that these gods represent the planets, and the planets have had this whole drama in the sky, and they were trying to tell us what happened. And we, again, look back, not having the imaginative capacity to understand exactly what they were telling us, because it's just no longer part of our experience, and we just dismiss it. And, oh, yeah, all that mythology, that's just a waste of time. It means nothing, right? But it's really interesting when you start to actually look what things mean, right? Nana, the moon, Inerta, Saturn. So again, the usual suspects of these planetary entities. And Enlil was the bowl of heaven. It was this energy, the bowl of heaven, and this energy coming down in this planetary alignment, right? And it was Enlil in the Sumerian myth who either caused or was involved with the Great Flood. There's the flood of the Bible with, Moses, or Noah rather, and he builds the ark. And the thing is, the same thing is actually true with Enlil and what's his name? Zisudra, right? Somehow a mortal named Zisudra managed to survive the flood, likely through the help of the god Enki. So Zisudra, basically is the Sumerian Noah. And again, the flood myth is all over the world, so it's really hard to say that, there was no flood. And again, I'm not coming at this from a typical Christian perspective. I just want to know the truth. I just think this is all really interesting. So yeah, Zasudra, the flood myth, all over the world. And what would happen if there was a major flood? Like, let's go with the narrative that basically Earth was enveloped by this membrane, right? It wasn't necessarily liquid water, but this layer of vapor in the atmosphere, of water vapor, and it kind of helped create this nice Pacific, calm, atmosphere within the Earth, and it kept it kind of a stable environment. Like there was a lot of carbon dioxide, so the plants could grow. There was a lot of moisture. It was, the Egypt was very green. The Nile was, totally a lush jungle paradise, right? And that was because we had this bubble that was keeping in, all the necessary nutrients for life. And the flood happened. So again, these planets start to move, and there's a flood myth. Earth's water breaks, okay, and the flood comes raining down Earth for 40 days or whatever. The flood comes down, and this is all the water in this layer of water vapor that was in the atmosphere of Earth comes down as rain. And where would you imagine you'd like to be if it rained for 7 days and such a flood were to happen? You'd probably want to be way the hell up in the mountains, right? So these are the Tibetan temples, okay? And I think it's really interesting to look at some of the symbolism, like here. That is the wheel of Saturn, the wheel of Shamash, okay, basically the wheel turning in the sky. That was Saturn. All right. Then this is really cool. So this is inside of a Tibetan temple. Look at this. So this, the sky is up here, and here is the great God fixed in the middle of the sky. And here's what's it called? Oh man, I can't remember the name of it, but it's like the symbol of the universe in the Tibetan cosmology, and it's just like they memorize the symbol, and it's just really interesting. But look, it's this big, it looks spherical, but it's really just a circle that's designed all crazy, and it's got these rings around it. That's Saturn sitting in the middle of the sky. They are remembering and keeping the memory of the old state of affairs when the heavens were aligned and everything was, as it should be. Everything was really perfect and nice. Okay, but then things changed. And what the spiritual lineages are the people who survived the flood and emerged, and most of the people, they just, especially near the coastlines, they just had to survive and rebuild their lives. And it was only the people firmly established way up in the mountains who would have really been able to maintain the lineage without any break. And so here you see basically in Tibet and Nepal, we have these like masters, who have been maintaining this lineage for thousands of years, and this memory and this covenant, which is basically just a memory of how things are and how the universe really works. Okay, so Abraham is basically the father of all Western religions. Islam, Judaism, Christianity is from Abraham. And Abraham was, nobody can really attach him specifically to a particular time. They say that, it's most the atheists will just say this is all just, a bunch of a story that was made up. But, at a certain point, you got to recognize this is a long ass story to make up. Like, isn't it more likely that all of this is actually code for something, that it means something, but it may not just mean what you think it is? Maybe you should stop thinking about it in a literal terms and then dismissing it. But maybe let your mind open a little bit and take things in their poetic context, that one word doesn't mean exactly what it means on the surface, but it represents something else. So Abraham and Sarah were the couple, okay? And what's interesting is in India, there was the Brahma and Saraswati, okay? And it's very interesting, and there's several people who've put together some pretty coherent, arguments that basically Abraham and Sarah are cognate, they're correlated, they're basically the same person as Brahma and Saraswati. So basically claiming that Abraham descended from some of the numerous Brahmin priests who left India to spread their teachings throughout the world. So again, going with the thesis that there was a flood, okay, there was a global culture beforehand, but the memory was preserved only at the, in the mountain peaks where everything else, was wiped out by giant waves, right? Abraham and Saraswati, are part of that lineage and came down from India, from, basically the high mountains. And Abraham, basically the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, so Jacob is the grandson of Abraham, and from Jacob, who was renamed Israel for some reason, basically come the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, and you may have heard of them, basically. And there's whole biblical history of the tribes of Israel and all this stuff. And sparing all the laborious theology, I'm going right for just what I consider to be the really interesting stuff, which is Moses, right? So Moses is obviously a big character in this whole lineage. He's the bringer of the law, right? He's kind of they leaded the Jews out of Babylon and parted the Red Sea and led them to this new land. And it's interesting here, you see Moses in this typical garb, you see with the red cloak with the white and black. Basically, that is because Moses was a Levite priest. Okay, and here's the different tribes of Israel. And here you see Levi, white, black, red. Okay, Moses, a Levite priest, rocking the red, white, and black. Okay. And just to point out going forward, the tribe of Dan is another one that I'm going to be running with. So the tribe of Levi and the tribe of Dan, Levi's color, white, black, red. Dan's color is green, generally speaking. Here's another incarnation of the Levite priesthood colors used in relatively modern times. I'll just leave that right there. So what's really interesting is that Moses is possibly the same person as the Pharaoh Akhenaten, okay? Actually, Sigmund Freud was the first one to really make this connection. Velikovsky, who was a contemporary of Freud, ran with it, but basically by analyzing all the different, ancient mythologies, they were able, and now basically this theory has been advanced. This Ahmad Osman guy, basically, it's a pretty, convincing story. The timelines line up. Basically, Moses was born in Egypt, brought up in the pharaonic royal palace. It leads the Israelites to their exodus. And basically, so yeah, you can check this out. I'm just kind of introducing it as part of this whole theory. But Akhenaten was the most mysterious and interesting of all ancient Egyptian pharaohs. He created a revolution in religion, philosophy, and art, which resulted in the introduction of the first monotheistic form of worship known in history. Okay. Sigmund Freud was the first to suggest a connection between Moses and Akhenaten. Yeah, so he originally suggested that Moses was an official in the court of Akhenaten and that Moses was heavily influenced by Akhenaten. But further research, pretty much shows that it's very possible that Akhenaten was the same person as Moses. All right, and Michael Sarian has a lot of interesting stuff about this, about how the religion before Akhenaten was very much a worship of all the different aspects of divinity. Okay, so there were a lot of different representations of God, but they were all kind of understood to be facets of the same universal essence, and that they all should be kind of respected equally. And Akhenaten came in and basically said, no, Aten is the great God, the one God, and he's better than all the other gods, and you shouldn't worship any other form of God. You should only worship Aten. So this is very interesting because this was, again, the first instance of squelching other forms of reverence for God, which is, in truth, if we take God to be the creator of the universe, not necessarily the character known in the Bible, as God, but God is the creator of the universe, then everything is God. So if we worship the earth, okay, we're worshiping God. If we worship the beauty of the human frame, in the light of that knowledge, you can. I mean, if I smoke cannabis in the worship of God, all right, and it's all the same. It's all just the same creation, right? But Akhenaten basically said no. And this is interesting because going with the Velikovsky and Venus as Lucifer, that basically like Venus, originally all the planets were aligned, and when things started to get jimmied and out of alignment, the Venus came through and caused all these major problems. And it seems like it happened kind of one time in 1500 BC, and that's when the Exodus happened. Okay, and that's also when Akhenaten was pharaoh of Egypt. Okay, and that the parting of the Red Sea, right? To go back to Moses, so Moses parted the Red Sea. What if that was Moses wasn't just parting the Red Sea because God's so great? It's just like this happened because of a major, like Venus is pulling the ocean away, and all of a sudden this whole land bridge just opens. I mean, that is, if there were ever a possible explanation for that sort of event, that would be it. Okay, as far as I'm concerned, that Venus, the planets fell out of alignment. Venus pulls with its electric gravity the oceans away, and this land bridge opens and basically it parts the Red Sea, and all of a sudden Moses leads the Jews out of captivity. And of course there's a lot of subtlety to be hashed out. This is a very rough theory, and just really interesting findings. I implore everybody to do their own research. Okay, I'm not claiming to be an expert on anything, just surfing the internet finding weird stuff, right? So the Amarna period, when basically we went from a polytheistic religion to Akhenaten, the first monotheist essentially, who was possibly Moses, and then after Akhenaten, the pantheon, the equality of all gods and goddesses, was restored under Akhenaten's successor, Tutankhamun. Okay, so King Tut, that's who Tutankhamun is. So Moses and Akhenaten are the same person. So that was the tribe of Levi. Okay, and the tribe of Levi. Basically, they were the priests. The tribe of Levi, the high priest of Israel, the Cohens, right? The Cohens are the priests, and they came from the tribe of Levi. And where is this? Yeah, so yeah, the Levites keep guard over the sanctuary. Basically, and all the rest of the tribes are given land, but the Levites basically they don't get land. They get basically the responsibility of administration. So yeah, that's that. So going forward again, and that's why I throw this in there, because the Levite priests, okay, that original priestcraft is the Jesuits today are basically the modern incarnation of the Levite priests, right? And so going in with the Israel and Zionism thing, that basically the Nazi state was established by the Triple Crown, as well as the state of Israel was created by the Triple Crown. And it's about thesis, antithesis, synthesis. You create fighting opposites, and you can create a third narrative out of that suits you, and that's their form of magic. But the tribe of Dan was another tribe of Israel, right? And going back to the color, so Dan, the color was blue. Basically, let's see. So the tribe of Dan is really interesting because the Ethiopian Jews, right? So there's lots of different people who claim to be Jews, and there's black Jews, okay? There's Ethiopian Jews, also known as Beta Israel, and they claim descent from the tribe of Dan. So, and it's really interesting. The Ethiopian Jews have this whole thing about how the Ark of the Covenant is in Ethiopia, right? And a lot of Ethiopian Jews moved to Israel, but the whole thing is they have their own, biblical lineage, and a lot of that, eventually came to be affiliated. So let me just pull up Ethiopia's flag real quick. Yeah, and so here we have the pentacle of Venus, right? And we have basically this color scheme, which you've seen before. So the blue, again, the tribe of Dan, okay? The 5-star pentacle of Venus, again, remembering the state of things as they were, maintaining the covenant. And, now we have the Rastafari movement, right, who also claim to be an Abrahamic religion. Basically monotheistic belief in a single God, and that the ultimate emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, is given essential importance. So basically, the Rastafarians claim to be descended from the tribe of Dan, is essentially the point that I'm trying to make there. And the other, there's lots of different places in the world that, are marked by the word Dan or Denmark, the Danes, right? But another one was the Tuatha De Danann, okay, which is the people of the goddess Dana, or the tribe of Dan, essentially. And this was the magical race of Ireland that I was talking about at the beginning, okay, who colonized the land. A supernatural race in Irish mythology. They are thought to represent the main deities of pre-Christian Gaelic Ireland. Okay, the Tuatha dwell in the other world but interact with humans and the human world. And so, yeah, it's really interesting. So the red-haired race. So King Tut, right? King Tut they did genetic research on him, and they found that he is part of genetic haplogroup R1b 1A2, right? And what's interesting, haplogroup R1b, this is the map of the distribution today of haplogroup R1b for King Tut. Okay. As you'll notice, it's pretty much straight up Irish. Like, this guy's a freaking redhead. Like, and even a lot of the mummies, you can even see like their hair was red, and they dyed their hair. But who knows? As if my hair gets gray, at one point I could see myself just dyeing it red just to have that sense again. But the point is that the mummies had red hair, and they actually genetically were haplogroup R1b, which is basically Irish today. Okay, so that's interesting. So so we have the Rastafaris and the Tuatha De Danann of Celtic Ireland claiming, descendants of the tribe of Dan, a tribe of Israel. The Gore said, so this is just linking again that the blue color of Dan. So the Druids of the Celtic Isles, right? There's 3 ranks essentially. The Ovates, the new ones learning, or wear green robes. The Bards, who are basically the keepers of the stories, who memorize basically the entire history of the people and history of everything, wear blue robes. So the keepers of the law, the keepers of the word, are the Bards, and they wear blue, like the tribe of Dan. And then the Druids, who were the highest rank, wear white robes. But yeah, so that's just interesting. Then also we have the Awen, and this represents basically the 3 pillars of, and the Gorset is a Welsh word that means throne. Okay, so this was where the knowledge and power sat for the Celts, was with this spiritual priests organization. And here's the blue Bards, a Cornish bard gathering, just again showing off the blue tribe of Dan colors, in contravention to Mr. What's his name, Moses over here. Yeah, anyway, there he is. Moses in his Levite colors. The tribe of Dan's wearing blue, and we got our bards. Okay, and then the IHS monograms. Okay, this is in Rome. Okay, at the Church of Rome, in the holy name of Jesus, Yechus. Okay, yes, right. And so we have again the solar kind of thing with the cherubs all around, and Yesa is the Irish, the god of light, like the supreme light god. Okay. The earliest and greatest solar deity was the Irish Yesa, and since his worship had been brought to Egypt by the West, his adepts simply adopted titles based on his holy name. The names of many later solar personalities, such as Dionysus, Orpheus, Orpheus, and Bacchus, Bacchiesus, Zeus, which is and Jesus, Jesus. Okay, they're basically renditions on the prototype. Okay, so. Yeah, talking about Hebrew was never spoken by the people of Syria, the so-called Jews. It was used by the ancient Irish priesthood of Yesa, precisely as Latin is used today in a Roman church to impress the multitude. Yesa was the third aspect of the ancient Druidic Trinity. It makes him equivalent to the Christian Holy Spirit as well as to Christ. Originally an Israelite, was probably an Yesite, or Yesalite. Okay. Moreover, once the god named Yesa is combined with the Egyptian god Ra, we get Isra. The final suffix El again, which is Saturn. They say it means messenger. So the name Israel is basically the names of God. Okay, we have El, Saturn, we have Ra, the sun, and we have Yesa, which is light. Okay, and light, everything is light. The sun is light, Saturn is light, we are light, the earth is light. Okay, we perceive physical matter, but it's all actually just electrons and electrical charge and light, right? So Israel is the name of the three names of God. Okay. The sun gods of ancient Arya. Yesa was the sun god of the Celts, Gales, and Scythians and Druids. And Ra, Amen-Ra, was the sun god of the Egyptians. So basically, yes, Amen-Ra and the original Celtic, religion that worshipped all of nature, all of creation as, equal parts of the great God Spirit, this was the tribe of Dan. Okay, and the tribe of Levi, from which Moses came, wanted to concentrate the power at the top of the priestcraft and give more power to himself, whereas the original religion was very much decentralized. Okay, Ireland and Scotland and the Celtic societies, they were anarcho-capitalists. They were all about decentralization of power. There was a high king, but it was a figurehead. Okay, and power was totally distributed, and it was fundamentally different than the feudal law system of the empire, basically all the way from Rome to London. All right, Scota, the two different daughters of Egyptian pharaohs in Irish mythology, after which Scotland is named. How many people know that? Scotland is named after an Egyptian pharaoh's daughter. And again, remembering that King Tut, basically his haplogroup R1b, was redhead. He was Irish. And Scotland is Scota. Scotland is named after Scota. Okay. And let me see. So yeah, Scota, and it's very much. There's also this stone. There's these stones that fall into the mythology, like these sacred stones that confer the right to rule. Right. So here's a Scota, mother of Scotland, daughter of a pharaoh. Right, the Moses connection to Scota. There's a supposition, people saying that basically Moses, who again was Akhenaten, or at least may have been Akhenaten, that it has been argued that Scota was actually Ankhesenamun, the widow of Tutankhamun, of King Tut, the redhead. Okay, so if Scota, again, redhead King Tut was married to Scota, all right, she left with the rest of the tribe of Dan, went over to Spain, all right, an Iberian Peninsula, the Ibernus, were the original Hebrews, okay, basically, and we have here the Declaration of Arbroath, okay, which is the Scottish Declaration of Independence, and this is right after William Wallace, right, freedom, okay, represented by Braveheart, okay, with Mel Gibson. And in that movie, basically, there's Robert de Bruce, and after this whole rebellion of Scotland against England, against King Edward, all right, they appeal to the Pope, and they're like, we need help fighting the English because they suck, all right? And so this Declaration of Arbroath was a letter that Robert de Bruce and the rest of the Scottish lords sent to the Pope. And so this is kind of interesting in the letter that they sent, right? Most Holy Father and Lord, we know we we know, and from the chronicles and books of the ancients, we find that among other famous nations, our own, the Scots, has been graced with widespread renown. They journeyed from Greater Scythia by way of the Tyrrhenian Sea and the Pillars of Hercules, and dwelt for a long course of time in Spain among the most savage tribes. But nowhere could they be subdued by any race, however barbarous. Thence they came, 1,200 years after the people of Israel crossed the Red Sea, to their home in the west, where they still live today. The Britons they first drove out, the Picts they utterly destroyed, and even though very often assailed by the Norwegians, Danes, and the English, they took possession of that home with many victories and untold efforts, and, as the historians of old time bear witness, they have held it free of all bondage ever since. In their kingdom there have reigned 113 kings of their own royal stock, and the line unbroken a single foreigner. So it's very interesting, mainly just thence they came 1,200 years after the people of Israel crossed the Red Sea to their home in the west where they still live today. Because, part of my thesis here is basically about 1500 BC with Moses, right, who was Akhenaten, who basically seized power while Venus was throwing the planet into chaos. Moses basically, and there's this split. There's this split in the priesthood, whereas before it was all kind of in union. Akhenaten says, no, screw the pantheism, worshiping of all things equally. I want more power, all right? And you all have to worship Aten, as the main god, and all this other worship is illegal now. Okay, so there was a split because the tribe of the Levite priests were saying that, and the tribe of Dan was like, "Screw that, bro." So basically, you had the Ethiopians go, okay, tribe of Dan, the pinnacle of Venus, right? The Rastafarians were in rebellion to the Levite priesthood. The tribe of Dan also went north, or went. So they say the Scythians, right, and then they went the Tyrrhenian Sea. That's the Mediterranean Sea. And then they went through the Pillars of Hercules, basically, which is Gibraltar right here. And they dwelt for a time in Spain, right? And then they went to Ireland and then to Scotland. And that is the story of Scotland, and that's what it says in the Scottish Declaration of Independence, aka the Declaration of Arbroath. Okay? Oh my goodness, these things move so fast. Okay. Tribe of Levi, tribe of Dan, Rastafari. Okay, William Wallace again. Freedom! Okay, the Scythians. All right, the Scythians and the Parthians. All we hear is about the freaking Roman Empire. Everything's about Rome in history as they teach it. But the Scythians and the Parthians were very much part of that world. Okay, and this kind of shows the territories with which they were affiliated. And what's interesting about the Scythians, they were affiliated with armed cavalry. Okay, so they armed their horses with metal. Okay, what does that sound like? It sounds like basically the armored knights of the medieval times in Europe. Okay, the Scythians were very, I guess, skilled when it came to metalworking. And it's very interesting because the scythe is also a druidic symbol. The druidic symbol of fire is a copper, either a copper or a gold scythe, right? And so the Ark of the Covenant was interesting. The Ark of the Covenant comes in, and there's lots of different people who claim to know where the Ark of the Covenant is. I just watched this thing about how they say the Ark of the Covenant might be in Japan, that these, Israelites went to Japan. And actually a very interesting story that there's places even in Japan that have these, Druidic, or the Druidic or Jewish, because again, back then in the ancient times, those were the same thing. The Druids were the Jews, okay? They were just astrologers, and they were keepers of the covenant, which was the memory of the Atlantis and the prior, celestial alignment. Okay, so the Ark of the Covenant, they say it was a gold-covered wooden chest. In Ethiopia, basically the Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Jews, they say that the Ark of the Covenant is in Ethiopia. And in Ireland and Scotland, they say it's the Stone of Scone, the Stone of Destiny, basically, was part of the Ark of the Covenant, and basically sitting... this stone was part of like the right to rule. Okay, the last time it was used was the coronation of Queen Elizabeth, the current Queen of England, the United Kingdom, in 1953. Old Liz of the House Bower, right? And so yeah, the Leah Fail is another stone. So again, it's like they talk about the Ark of the Covenant like it's one thing, but it seems like there's a lot of different, kind of stones and places and things that fit the bill. So it's almost like there might have been more than one Ark of the Covenant, but we're just thinking about it in Indiana Jones terms. And it's funny, even in there, like in Indiana Jones, what is it associated with? It's with lightning. Okay, it's a very energetically charged, like superconducting stone, right? And the Leah Fail is associated with the Tuatha De Danann, that they brought, basically these rocks, these covenant, markers of the covenant. All right, and even in Sweden, we have, I guess, the Stones of Mora. I didn't actually know about that, but I found that. And so, again, the covenant is basically a contract or agreement. And, in this narrative, I'm interpreting it as basically it's the memory of the prior state of affairs, the ancient spiritual wisdom of the species, basically our entire history and the true meaning of all the symbols. Right, and then ark, in the spelling ARK is basically a big boat, but there's another spelling ARC, which is basically a part of a circumference of a circle, a luminous electrical discharge between two electrodes or other points. Move with a curving trajectory, form an electric arc. Okay, that seems a lot more relevant, especially in light of, basically the theory that basically these people were the Hyperboreans. They were living up at the top of the world, and they were basically taking in the energy from the aligned planets, that there was this actual flow of energy and material between the arc, right? The agreement between the planets was arcing, the arc of the covenant, right? And there was actually material coming down to Earth from space at Hyperborea, at these certain sites that were the crown of the world, one of which was in the British Isles. And so there's there's all these different monuments that are kind of resonating with the Earth grid. And up here at the top, we have plenty of them. So we have, the stone of Scone, right? We have the Leah Fail, the stone of destiny, right? The Ethiopians, they say have it, but basically Newgrange. Okay, this is older than what they suppose the age of the Great Pyramids to be. So 3200 BC. So over 5,000 years old was Newgrange, right? And these places where the energy was coming in. So, it's possible that these people were not only just, looking up at the sky and seeing this, but at the top of the world, this energy was coming down in a vortex into the earth. And some of these locations were actually places where they kept this sacred site, where it was a union point between heaven and earth, right? And in the Egyptian pantheon, we have the first god Atum, who is Saturn, right? And then Saturn gives birth to Shu and I think Nephthys, and basically they divide this energy comes down to Earth, right? And it comes down in these sites, right? And here's a map basically showing that even this is where the Freemasons come in, is they know all this. The Freemasons, basically claim to be the modern heirs to the Druidic knowledge, and they've built cities in line, like, so here's Teotihuacan, where the Great Pyramids are in Mexico. Stonehenge, New York is lined up right with that, with Stonehenge, and here's London, and Washington, D.C., and Mexico City, and Damascus in Syria, as well as Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, are all lined up. Okay, that's interesting. And so there is this Earth grid. It does exist. And if you want to say that it's a bunch of hokum, it's a bunch of baloney, well, then you're saying that the Freemasons, all of these cities were built in a straight line just for shits and giggles, okay, which is not rational position to me, right? So the Great Pyramids, right, there was this energy coming down, and they were basically building these sites to basically maintain the Earth's energy in alignment with the flow coming in. And again, here's Atlantis in rings. So basically, that's kind of my thesis today. It's kind of all over the place, but I just want to reiterate that we had a global civilization, and it was very much attached to when the solar system was in a different configuration. Things were much more peaceful. We didn't have to fight. There was food everywhere. And that as things got thrown out of alignment, all of a sudden we had to fight each other for food, and things weren't as abundant, and we felt that God had judged us. And so there was a split between the tribes of Israel, and basically out of that, the Levite priest pushed for more and more control, which manifested in the fascist spiritual hierarchy that we have here now. Of the Triple Crown, ruled by the Pope, and the white Pope, who is the king of the world, and then there's the Black Pope, who's basically the head of the Jesuit order, and basically the President of the United States, who's kind of like the ruler of of the queen riding on the beast, right? Who can destroy anyone who goes against the empire. So that's it. Kind of a wide-ranging topic. Hope you got something out of it. Let me know if you have any thoughts. And I'm going to be keeping. This is just kind of a report on the research that I'm doing, and I think that it's following this story that we can escape the bullshit, and we can actually build a common narrative that'll lead to some really cool things. So that's it. I hope you guys have a great day, and wholeness and balanced vibrations. And I'll see you next time. Cheers.